Jack.
Levi.
The Book Club from Hell.
Hello everyone, this is Jack with the Book Club from Hell. It's not really Jack. This is actually a text-to-speech model based on Jack's voice, just as Jean Baudrillard would have wanted. This episode is on Jean Baudrillard's book, Simulacra and Simulation, published in 1981. Baudrillard was a French philosopher and cultural critic who, in Simulacra and Simulation, explored ideas of cultural reproduction, reproductions of reproductions, and one's ability to get lost in schemata of the world. All of this is rendered in the most densely baguette prose I have ever come across. This speech model sounds like a lobotomized version of me, and it is extremely unsettling to listen to. This episode is a special one because we were joined by Justin Murphy, a philosopher and independent scholar whose work is well worth checking out. He has an upcoming book, The Independent Scholar, and runs the Other Life online community, among other ventures. If you like what we're doing with this podcast and want to support us, we have a Patreon account, the link to which is in the show notes. We release bonus episodes on Patreon and have weekly chats with subscribers about our most recent episode. I've also published a novel called Tower, if you're interested in hearing more from me. And finally, we have a Discord server for this podcast, on which you can find Levi, me, and plenty of other degenerates who listen to the Book Club from Hell, the link to which is, once again, in the show notes. Shout out to John Kelly, and if you're ready to learn what hyperreality means, then listen on. Enjoy. So this episode, we're very, very pleased to have Justin Murphy on, of Other Life and several other ventures. I've been listening to you for quite a while. I first found you through your podcast. I forget which episode it was specifically. There are a number of them. It might have been Nick Land when I was looking for ways to understand him a bit better. But since then, I've come to know you through the works you've put out, and I'm really pleased to be chatting to you with Levi today. So,
thanks for having me.
First of all, could you introduce yourself? Introduce any things that you're currently working on or currently have out that you want people to know about, so I don't forget to bring that up later on and feel like a complete dumbass once you've stopped.
Sure, yeah. I'm just a humble writer these days. I was a professor for many years, and then I sort of left to do my own thing, and that's been my kind of focus and obsession for the past 5 years now. I've just been building this new kind of business model as an independent scholar. So I have a few different moving parts to that, but mostly, yeah, just kind of designed this new type of lifestyle, really, just to spend most of my time reading and writing and teaching, but in a way that works on the internet and that I can just make money independently. So yeah, I've done a pretty good job with that over the past 5 years. It's taken a lot of testing and iteration, and it's been really pretty crazy and hard, but now, about 5 years in, I'm can sort of say I've been successful. I think I'm doing this stuff full time, and I'm actually just now starting to come up for air a little bit and tell people, this is possible. And I've learned a thing or two about how to do it. So I actually have a book coming out by the end of this summer. It'll be out in print. Just a short book. It's called The Independent Scholar. And it's pretty much I've just sat down and tried to write out everything I've learned about this kind of crazy process and how I've made it work. There are a lot of people trying to do this sort of thing, so I thought it would be useful for others. So,
Where would be the best place for people to keep abreast of what you're doing?
Yeah, well, I have a whole little kind of group around this. You could go to indiescholars.org to learn more about that if you wanted to. And my main little brand that I do all my writing and publishing under is just called Other Life, which you can find at otherlife.co. But yeah, that pretty much sums it up.
Yeah, and for those listening, both Levi and I have read earlier versions, a draft version of The Independent Scholar, and really, really enjoyed it. And we're both really looking forward to the final version. If the print version is the final version, I'm not sure if you'll keep iterating on it.
A huge motivator
beyond that, but
us, not taking on external massive, like there was some very big VC firms that wanted to back us. Like, nah, we need to stay independent, like
there you go.
Sequoia came up to us, we're like, nah, we're done.
Nah, we don't need you millions.
Yeah, I know. It's a lot of work. Keeping them from knocking the door down, I know.
Yeah, we have taken on a few Raytheon contracts, but that's mostly because we're just big supporters of their work. That was more,
we'd do it for free if we could.
That was from the heart.
Of course.
So for this episode, we asked you if there was a book that you wanted to talk about that you felt was underappreciated or obscure or really interesting for any reason, and you picked Simulacra and Simulation by Jean Baudrillard. So why was it that you picked this book? Because it was on our radar. It had been requested of us a few times. So I was quite pleased, actually, when you suggested this one. But why was it that you picked it?
The reason I picked this book is because I actually only read it for the first time recently. And for whatever reason, when I was reading all this stuff back in the day, this one escaped my attention. For some reason, I never read this. I read it a few months ago. And the one thing I was most struck by, which was I found really exciting. I found this book very sort of thrilling and impressive. The main thing being that it's surprisingly social scientific. I found it's surprisingly sort of almost empirical. Obviously, it's a philosophy book, but a lot of people think of these sort of French postmodernists as it's a very literary style, and a lot of people think of it as like setting sail from reality. That it's just like this like flowery word game. And what I was very struck by reading this book in particular is, this maps on social life in a pretty compelling way and in a pretty tractable way. For those of you who don't know, I have a background. I was a social scientist, a professional political scientist, precisely, and I did quantitative methods, statistical modeling, and that was something I spent a lot of time in my career doing. Is sort of causal inference, like actually testing and identifying.
Like Pearl, sort of.
Well, like, does this one variable cause this other variable? Basically, that
sort of things.
That's kind of what. That's what social science is at the end of the day. When good social science is the very meticulous testing using the scientific method to determine, like, if you change this one variable in the world, will this other variable change after it as a result of that first variable changing? That is essentially just a question of causality. And this is what the statistical social scientists have gotten very, pretty precise with all the faults of that sort of, academic research standing. We have a lot of knowledge about how to do that nowadays. And I know a thing or two about that. Anyway, the French, theorists of the late 20th century are not associated with this kind of modeling or this kind of rigor and empirical kind of consistency. Quite the opposite. Their image or their reputation is the opposite. And reading this book, I was just sort of like, oh, this is actually, this is plausible and compelling, even from the most kind of hard-nosed social scientific kind of perspective. So we could maybe go over the key ideas if people want me to kind of rehearse some of that. We could do that. But that was kind of what I found most compelling about it. Do you want me to jump into sort of like how to think about it, or do you have?
I guess as a bit of context, like maybe how does he compare to some of the other philosophers that you've and thinkers that you've done deep dives on Other Life? Yeah,
well, so you might want to kind of very loosely and broadly put Baudrillard in this like much bigger bucket, speaking very loosely, like the French postmodernists or something. This is a term that people will want to use. But it's really, it's really just kind of a uselessly broad bucket, and you can't really say just like the French postmodernists. It's a lot of just too much difference in there. There's really not. There's sort of a stylistic, I guess, kind of commonality you could argue, but
they're all French, I guess.
It's just you can't really say anything very meaningful or interesting about that set, because they're quite different, even different periods of time. So like, people will want to put Baudrillard in the same bucket as like Foucault or Deleuze or something like this, but that's not really right, because, well, first of all, he comes after. He's quite kind of later in the series of kind of French philosophers that he's sometimes lumped in with. But the other thing is that he really stands out for being very beyond Marxism and over Marxism. Frankly, a lot of them are like, and people don't understand this very much, but like Foucault is very much, post-Marxist in many ways, and Deleuze is very much most post-Marxist in many ways. Like that, like these people are very much like leaving Marx behind in many ways if you look closely, and in a lot of ways, like the departure and the rejection of Marx is actually like more significant than their Marxist kind of inheritance in some ways. So people overestimate the Marxist element, and with Baudrillard, it's uniquely true. He's clearly not okay. All these philosophers kind of write in this Marxist register, but Baudrillard is obviously almost explicitly anti-Marxist. I mean, he's brutal against his critiques of the left. He doesn't really write as a leftist. He's not really trying to, support the movement like a lot of the others kind of were, even though they were critical. So he's like one of the people in this bucket. This is what I'm getting at. He's sort of the most aggressively and obviously explicitly non-Marxist. He's criticizing Marx as much as capitalism, basically, even though he's writing in this kind of Marxist register. That's what I would say is one thing that stands out about him. And that's one reason why he's fun to read right now, actually. That's why it's kind of thrilling to read him, because he's like very, kind of fits into like a kind of, neo-reactionary kind of like, like
Landian
anti-leftism. So it's interesting.
Yeah. And would you say that, so would it be safe to say you'd put him off axis then?
What do you mean off axis?
Like if you have a capitalist Marxist axis or something like that, he's just doing his own thing. Sometimes I think I come across a thinker who's just like, I can't even, really play, maybe Nick Land would be a good example of that. I just really struggle to place him anywhere. He's just kind of doing his own thing.
Yeah, for sure. That's how I would place him. I mean, I think he's a real philosopher. That's how you should be. You want to be off axis, in your words. It's a good phrase. It's like, yeah, that's definitely true of him. And a lot of the great thinkers are like that. And I think that's one of the reasons why I really enjoyed reading this recently, and I think people would benefit from reading it today.
So we have that's a really good point, especially given like how much there's all this like discussion about neo-Marxism and this
my favorite term,
long march to the institution and all that sort of stuff. And here we are saying like, well, there's this French philosopher who maybe people would lump in with them, so maybe our audience will like go and give this guy a read and have a think about it. But we often try to start our conversations with maybe it's an idiosyncratic question for us, but we ask the question, what is the person's problem situation in this book? And by problem situation, what we mean is a kind of combination of both, like the specific problem that we're taught that they're discussing, but also by blending it with the word situation, we're also talking about sort of the context, like what are the ideas that they're dealing with. So for example, like a good example would be like Galileo Galilei's problem situation wasn't just trying to understand, like the transit of objects in the cosmos, but it was the situation was also like the ideas that were present in the society at that time. So, okay, trying to understand the movement of objects in the cosmos, given that the underlying explanatory theology of Europe at that time was geocentric and so forth. So it's a little bit kind of contextualizing it to the ideas that they're dealing with at the time. So if that makes any sense at all to you, what do you think Jean Baudrillard's problem situation is in Simulacra and Simulation?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, one possible answer is, the war does come up a lot in the book. That's sort of one theme of the book, is sort of this analysis of war and kind of how it's perceived differently, how it functions in our minds differently today. So you could say, things like this, like the Gulf War or whatnot, are sort of in the background. The situation with nuclear weapons also seems to kind of arise a bit. Like there's this kind of, there is in the background of this book a kind of like, this looming sense of like war and bombs and stuff like that. I would say that's sort of like one kind of theme, I guess, or problem of the book, if you will. But I think the real one, honestly, is like the failure of the kind of 1968 revolution in France.
Interesting.
Because I mean, this was really like a major problem for for Marxism, basically. Because
why was that?
Western Marxism, anyway. Because the 1968 situation in France, it was basically the closest that a developed Western country ever came to an actual Marxist revolution. Was that period in 1968, famously May 1968, where like the whole country was on strike. There was rioting in the streets. Like the radical left was like a very just dominant, way of thinking at the time. And it pretty much suffused much of society. And there was basically this kind of like genuine revolutionary moment in a wealthy Western country in France in 1968. And for all the radical intellectuals of France who were, they are just generally this kind of like left-wing set, although there's some exceptions to that. The overall kind of leaning of it all was this sort of left-wing leaning. It was a massive disappointment because it didn't work. It was like you could have most of the country in a revolutionary fervor. And you could have the whole country going on strike, and like they shut down the government. Like it was really like a crazy thing, and yet it didn't work. Everyone kind of went back to normal, went back to their normal jobs. And I think that it doesn't come up in the book that much. It is actually mentioned in the book, but this is sort of the because what it really represents was sort of like the end of any hope of like Marxist revolution in any of the Western countries where these intellectuals, lived. And so a lot of the kind of post-Marxist thinkers after 1968 are, whether they say it or not, they're mostly trying to understand the impossibility of revolution. Like this whole dream is over. You have to remember, people don't remember this, or people today can't relate to this. But before 1968, up into around that time, the radical left intellectuals, which is to say the high status, fashionable intellectuals as such, all really, really believed that revolution was like on the horizon. Like there was a genuine like confidence in it that we completely forget. We don't know it today. We don't have it today. But until 1968 and culminating in 1968, like all these people who wrote like this, when they used the word revolution and, overthrowing capitalism, they really meant it. And they actually believed it was coming. You read their biographies and memoirs and stuff, they actually believed it was coming. And so 1968 was this moment where like everyone basically realized, okay, it's never going to happen. It's over. That dream is over. And yet you still have people kind of like acting like, kind of still going through the motions, saying those words, going to like left-wing meetings and, activist groups and stuff. Like you still have this, simulation of like these dreams and protests and so on.
Interesting.
And that's the real context for this book. And I think he like diagnoses it brilliantly with like a really compelling and plausible kind of like model of the world. So that's how I would tee it up.
There's an interesting interplay, despite all the stuff that you were saying before about empiricism in Baudrillard's work. There's also still an interesting role of, I don't know if you'd call it, I don't know what the right word is. The language escapes me at the moment. But it feels as though when you read certain types of these like sociological philosophers, it's empirical on one level, but it's also they're saying things that are almost more abstract than we can almost come up with empirical methods to really like test or whatever. And I guess that's the nature of some of these cultural analyses. And what you just said just then is very interesting. You're saying like there's this cultural movement, this sort of schism, historical schism, after which there's this like shift in the culture, at least in the Western left, which can only really be diagnosed in almost a by a philosopher as opposed to a empirical sociologist. It's really interesting.
Yeah. I mean, of course, it is philosophy and it's abstract, but what I said at the beginning is that what I was getting at was that it's this is not a kind of literary flowery kind of like poetic exercise. It's like, no, he's really looking at real things, and his model is it does map to actual phenomena. So I'll give you one example of like what's so compelling about it is. So one of the key ideas is that this basically, he says the world, we've become obsessed with models basically, and all of our thinking has become like pushed into and kind of packed into a certain way of thinking about models. And you know, people who haven't studied science and scientific method might not know that like this is what scientific method is. You literally make models of the world, and it's great. It's genius. It's very powerful. You create this little tiny toy version of reality, because then you can test it, you can play with it, and you can test it, and that's what gives you traction to actually go analyze really, really carefully and effectively one piece of the world and how this thing causes that thing. You can do that by making these models, and that's why it's called, you know, statistical modeling is sometimes called it's called modeling, right? It's or modeling in general is a word that's used. So he's absolutely right to the degree, you know, and of course, you know, what is scientifically demonstrable is basically the only thing that we consider real nowadays. That is what modernity is, right? It's like religious claims, anything that you can't test with the scientific method and verify. We just today consider that as not real. Like that's what it means. You know, if you believe in God or something, well, you can't prove it. You can't test it with a scientific model. So therefore, like, you're just making it up, or, you know, it's not real. God is not real. Therefore, that is like overwhelmingly how people think today. And that's what he's saying. So he's saying we only think in terms of models, and that's absolutely objectively correct. That is just, that's it. Historically, accurate and empirically sophisticated. Not only is it a correct description of how the modern mind, you know, functions and what we value and consider legitimate or not. But notice that he's grappling here with science and actually how science works. You know, a lot of people who kind of criticize science or whatever don't even really know how it works. So all this discussion he has about models and how we are trapped in model thinking. It's just very astute in a technical way. And so, of course, for him, what he's saying is that once models are the only valid way of thinking, as they are today, I think that's correct. What happens is you can't really get out of the model. It's just models versus models. And then you actually start to forget about the real stuff outside of the models, because you can't put everything in a model. And that's true too. Like any good scientist will tell you that as well. So in this weird way, we have all these competing strategic models, and all of social life has become basically your model versus mine. Like who's got the best model that's most powerful. So basically what he's saying is all thinking as such, like the way we use our brains all together, is shoehorned exclusively into this hyper-competitive model thinking, so that your entire life and everything you're thinking about, what you're doing and what's real and what's good and what's desirable and what's not, like everything has now been shoehorned into this very tiny and specific way of thinking, which is powerful for engineering purposes, but is like highly, highly limited. And so if you just show someone like an object, like a real thing, that's surprising, but if it doesn't fit into a model, then it's as if it doesn't exist. And that's an error. That's kind of the chaos of the status quo, that like reality itself increasingly just does not exist. And I mean, that's where it starts to get abstract and a bit, you know, the French thinkers, they are kind of prone to these kind of, you know, overstatements and provocative, poetic kind of exaggerations. But like all the stuff that he's famous for out of this book, the stuff about like, you know, reality not existing and blah, 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 that type of stuff. That's what he's saying. And that's basically correct. Like there's a very real way in which the actual lived world of objects has increasingly sort of disappeared from us. Like we're like losing touch with it in a way. And I think his model explains all of that, and that's what he's saying. And I think he's absolutely right. You kind of look at this and you're like, oh, this is actually just like a true model of what's happening, and has many different sort of like implications that basically do map on to what we see. And this is not what people expect when they think of the literary French postmodernists. So that's one of my risks there.
Especially when you start thinking about like, hey, we're talking online in a podcast, and then we're going to go and talk to our, pseudonymous Discord fans, and I don't know, maybe they'll send us some Bitcoin over Lightning Network or something, and it's all just numbers on silicon at some point. It's just becoming more and more unphysical. Yeah. It's kind of the then Steve Jobs might say, well, those are objects in a different sense. A virtual object is still an object. But it is very interesting. So I had some, I'll let Jack ask some questions. I was supposed to shut up because I'm so tired, but I can't help myself.
No, go for it. You're disinhibiting with sleep
there's a few key terms which I think would be great for you to speak to and like enlighten us about what Baudrillard means and pass comments on them as you see fit. But some of the big ones would be like obviously simulacra and simulation, and also hyperreality and the real, and obviously any other key terms that you think would be interesting to unpack.
Right. Okay, you're kind of giving me a quiz here. This is above my pay grade. Let's say it was a few weeks that I read it. Okay, sorry, I did not have
those really well.
I did not have a my like lecture notes out here. Let's see.
I think our listeners
because with those questions Levi just asked, that's basically putting terminology onto what you just explained.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. Hey, look, listen. I think my strength is talking about these books in an honest, organic like language that actually makes sense with people and it's kind of fun to listen to. You start pressing me on details, I'm gonna need a minute to. I'm no Baudrillard expert. I just suggested this book because I just read it for the first time. So probably wouldn't make the most. I'm going to suggest it will not make the best content for your listeners for me to try to give you definitions of these things because I don't have them at hand. But I can talk about it broadly. Should I do that?
I feel very strongly that you should repeat verbatim the clone story chapter. I'll have the book in front of me, and if you make any mistakes, I'll let you know.
Right. There's some I'm just forgetting the specific distinction between the simulacra.
That's okay. I'm not asking for too much specifics. Just like broad brushstrokes.
But yeah, what people need to know, or just the key ideas. I mean, it's actually really simple and intuitive. I think, which is that once the world becomes absorbed with this kind of model thinking that I described just a minute ago, then basically, to put it very bluntly and loosely, everything becomes a simulation, basically, because so simulations correspond to the model. So when you build a model of the world, what you're in another sense, you're making a simulation. Like if you could think of the simulation as sort of like the acting out version of the model, right? Yeah, so you build this point, you build this toy model of the world, like a scientific model or something like that. If you actually sort of live that out or embody that in some kind of way, and then you can kind of incorporate that into what you're doing, then you're basically simulating. Or think about like running a simulation, right? If you like a military exercise or something like that, you're running like a simulation. What are you doing when you run a simulation? You're acting out some model of the world. You're testing out some model of the world. And what he's saying is that all of social life has now kind of been reduced to this. So this just makes sense, right? Like when you can only think in terms of models, thanks to sort of the scientific, kind of epistemology that is dominant, then think about it. You go to a party and you're like, talking to people the whole time. What you're actually doing is you're performing some model of who you're trying to be. You know what I'm saying? Just like, the war planners are running simulations for their like war exercises. Like we do that every day with our relationships and like how we perform in the world. It's like this self-referential, self-conscious kind of behavior that's not organic and it's not natural. it's playing out this model thinking. That's what he means. I believe that's how I would read it.
And there's this interesting idea of the simulation becoming more real than the real itself. Right? Like an interesting modern example of that would be like if you were a drone pilot, like an attack drone pilot in a war, how easy would it be to tell the difference between, I mean, I don't know, obviously, like what the resolution is like on their simulations, except at some point, is there really a meaningful difference between doing a simulation of a drone strike and doing a drone strike if you're just interacting with this thing through a screen? You know, it's a very weird sort of form of warfare.
Especially because it just looks like Call of Duty 4.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I don't know, do you have any thoughts about this idea of the simulation becoming, or at least being perceived as more real than reality itself?
Yeah, I mean that's right. That is basically what you get from him. But one point he makes is that this, and this is important, is that simulations are not fake, and they're not unreal.
Yeah.
They're not unreal. This is important because, because if you say that simulations are fake or they're not real, and then you compare it to sort of the real or whatever, that doesn't quite do the trick. And he's very adamant about this.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It doesn't do the trick.
Yeah. To really get it right and to understand, for this to make sense, you have to understand that the simulation is, it's not unreal. He says it's not unreal. It's just, the way you should think about it is, it's like, the way I think about it is, it's like this alternative parallel kind of double of the world, this model space, which we live in and which we talk in and which we act in, and we are really doing it. But it's just sort of like mentally separated and set off from like the real in a way, but we are really doing it. So there's also this discussion of the sign, right? And so another way to think about it is that like we have these webs of words, really, that this web of language that we take to be real, and which we do in some sense really kind of interact with and model our lives on. But what he's saying is that we've with model thinking, with the domination of model thinking, we've entered this period where the signs never cash out back to like reality.
It's all like recursively into what would you say? Interreferential.
Yes. That's right. So the simulation, it is this self-contained, self-referential kind of symbolic system that we now live in completely and exclusively.
Yeah, what a trick.
That's what he's saying. And again, that really maps, I think. So what else? What else should we push into?
One thing I found really interesting that he talks about, because he's set out this situation that you just described of this intense model thinking, and then he introduces mass media into it. So organizations pouring information, pouring either new components of a model, new connections within the model into the existing model, and just pouring rocket fuel on the fire to the point where, chaos. Like you said, every sign within the model just points at another bit of the model, and you've just got this like entirely circular, entirely self-contained.
Do you feel like that
way of understanding the world
in American culture? Is that a big? Yeah. Sorry, I'll let Jack finish.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think you do see this throughout all of Western culture, maybe, and increasingly, the whole world. Yeah. I mean, I think it is just true. Here's like one of the money quotes that people often cite. I dug up. It says, he talks about the different phases of the image, and this is kind of like his sort of like historical model in a nutshell. He says, such would be the successive phases of the image. It is the reflection of a profound reality first. Then it masks and denatures a profound reality. Then it masks the absence of a profound reality. Then it has no relation to any reality whatsoever. It is its own pure simulacrum. And I think this is basically right. You know, like when we first sort of evolve images and symbols to kind of represent the world, we do that as this kind of like sacred activity of, you know, it's like religious art, right? Or the, you know, the cave paintings or whatever. It's like our first sort of move into the image is really a reflection of a profound reality, right? Whether that's like the religious, you know, icons or the, you know, the cave paintings or whatever. It's like we're reflecting a profound reality. Then at a certain level, those images become sufficiently sort of populated and dense enough that they mask and denature the profound reality, and we just kind of like, you know, become obsessed with the images. And that's sort of like the sin of, you know, iconoclasm or whatever. When you become invested in the icons. And then at a certain point, it masks the absence of a profound reality. Like it starts hiding stuff, right? You actually use these images, that people start using these images in a way that sort of covers over facts of reality. And then just at a certain point, once this process gets underway and is fully accelerated for long enough, you just get a world of images that has no relation to reality whatsoever. And I think that's what we see, right? I mean, to me, that's a brilliant kind of explanation for like all the cognitive chaos in the world today. It's like, these are just word games. Like these are just word games, basically. They never go back to there's never a moment of reckoning where they have to actually cash out back into anything real. That is like the overwhelming majority of like all the words that people use, especially on like social media and stuff. Social media is sort of the easiest way to think about it, right? Like all of the you know, kind of effort and words generated on like a site like Facebook or Twitter or whatever. It's like it really makes it very easy to understand what he was talking about. And of course, he was talking about this before all of those kind of things really came into their full bloom. So that's how I think about it.
There's two interesting points that come to mind for me. Like, I'll let you go in and take Jack. I was just getting really interesting points. The first one is like, there is this kind of like lingering, I don't know if you'd say shadow or like spirit of Marx, in the sense of like, I get this sense of like alienation in the same way they say like, you know, like a work can be alienated from one's labor. But this is almost like a symbolic or spiritual alienation from like the substance of one's life itself. And because you're enraptured by this, maybe the way that you put it is like this model space. And there's this kind of psycho-spiritual alienation going on. So that's the first thing. And the second thing I note is the extreme example of this is modern AI technology, so-called AI technology, where it's just completely self-contained internet data regurgitated onto itself with no way of, like, as you said, like cashing out of the database and the model that it's trained on into any sort of like physical embodiment in the real world. And I don't know, those were the two things that came to mind when you were speaking. I wonder if you've got any thoughts about those two ideas.
Yeah, maybe. I think the first one is stronger than the second one. I think on religion and God, you're absolutely right. That is surprisingly sort of resonant in all of this. Like, there's one quote here in my notes that is very good. Well, basically, you know, Baudrillard you very much get a sense that for Baudrillard, sort of like the withdrawal of God and our kind of atheistic, you know, scientific arrogance has been like a disaster, and it's one of the reasons for the problems that he's talking about. Here's a good example. He says, quote, "All Western faith and good faith became engaged in this wager on representation." Broadly, you know, this kind of world, the world of images, and where we use signs and symbols to, you know, manipulate the world, like science, basically. All Western faith and good faith became engaged in this wager on representation. That a sign could refer to the depth of meaning, that a sign could be exchanged for meaning, and that something could guarantee this exchange. God, of course. So he's saying God was always the reason why there could be this interchange between models and symbols on the one hand and reality itself. Like that did work. That can work. That can work. Right. There can be an open a kind of constant. interchange, but God is sort of underwriting that.
Yeah.
And then he says,
really
what if God himself can be simulated? That is to say, can be reduced to the signs that constitute faith. Then the whole system becomes weightless. It is no longer itself anything but a gigantic simulacrum, not unreal, but a simulacrum. That is to say, never exchanged for the real, but exchanged for itself in an uninterrupted circuit without reference or circumference. So, yeah, God and faith is it's explicit, in fact, here.
It brings up the question of, is not only is exit possible from this sort of thing, but is exit even then a meaningful concept once you've entered into this sort of state?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I kind of think so. I love that meme or that quote from Tyler, the Creator. Do you ever see this? Like, yeah, it's like just walk away from the computer.
Oh, about cyberbullying.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's right.
He was responding to Jean Baudrillard.
Like he's basically saying like bullying's not real. Like, just walk away from the bully. I think
Tyler,
about that.
The Creator, has solved hyperreality. You heard it here first.
I think about that with all this stuff. Yeah, like you just walk out of the simulation, bro. It's not that hard. So yeah, I that's how I think about it. Like, I tend to think once you see through this stuff, you can kind of like, pierce the matrix and just walk away. But that reminds me of the other thing that was brought up about AI, and I don't know. I mean, I think it's more complicated than you suggested, because you're like, AI is making robotics way better. You're going to see really good robotics, and so I don't know. I mean, if all this stuff starts. If I have like a really good like robotic servant in my house, like doing physical tasks for me, I don't know. That's kind of cashing out to the real, right?
Yeah.
So I'm kind of, I don't know. I'm sort of like, maybe all this simulation stuff beyond a certain level of intensity, maybe it does actually start to cash out into the real or something. Maybe we're entering a new era that AI kind of indicates. Maybe I don't have a clear read on it, but
I think your raising of the robotics is a good counterpoint. I was thinking specifically about these large language models that to me seem, what would the correct word be, like an eddy current in, or like a, like when you get like a swamp that doesn't have a nice current coming through it, it just becomes like stagnant with these large language models. But for sure, robotics would be a part of the world where like is a counterpoint to what I was saying, because they have to be wired into the world to be interacting with things. But that's just me being really like, I don't know, like I use the large language models obviously to like do stuff, but I also have this underlying sense of deep caution when using them.
All right, guys, I got to run. I have a hard stop, unfortunately, but the Independent Scholar, it's coming up. People can get it in print. It's gonna be a nice print book. It should be out by the end of the summer. You'll be able to find it at indiescholars.org, or just search for Justin Murphy, the Independent Scholar.
Go check out Justin's stuff.
It's everything I've learned, good and bad. Just try to put it down in one book for other people who are interested in that kind of thing. But I hope you found this useful. I hope your audience found it fun. And thank you so much for inviting me. And I'm sorry that I have to run so promptly. I'm usually happy to stick around longer. But yeah, man, gotta go, guys.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for coming on.
I appreciate the good questions. Good meeting you guys.
See you. Thanks.
Later, guys.
So we thought we'd just record a little bit of us talking about Jean Baudrillard after Justin left. It'll mostly be us talking about him in the context of today.
This is a week delay, by the way.
Yeah, week delayed. Because Justin Murphy basically summarized a lot of the book. And if we're going to go into more detail on it, we'll basically just be repeating what he said, but less well. So, yeah, I wanted to chat about Jean Baudrillard and the ideas in Simulacra and Simulation in 2024, because a lot of things he wrote about, and he published this book in 1981, I think, are more relevant today, or even more interesting, particularly his ideas about endless reproduction, particularly reproduction replacing production, the idea of a simulacrum, which is this copy without an original, or something that has been copied and reproduced so many times that the original has either been lost or has become meaningless. The term original no longer means anything. It's just become disconnected from. He keeps calling it the real. I'm not sure how I feel about the term when he uses the term real, because on one hand, I kind of get what he means. So he's talking about some sort of base reality that is not schematized. On the other hand, I'm not sure that I would consider these schema not real, but I guess that's just I don't even know if it's a nitpick because it's kind of central to what he's talking about, but I'm just not quite sure how to feel about his use of that term or that idea of real. But I want to talk about computers, memes, and social media, because it's such a shame that he didn't live to see memes, because he would have just lost his shit over memes. Because
he would have.
His ideas in this book are cool in that he talks about, okay, so if you live in a society which is just schematizing the world more and more and more and more and more until it's totally closed off in its schema, which just refer to other schema instead of cashing out by referring to some sort of ground reality. That's what he was talking about in 1981. But memes are cool because you've got it's a repetition of the same image. Suppose we're just talking about a still image and not video, so just a still image, and it initially has a meaning. It's interesting that it is reproduced, so people send them to each other, people copy and paste them and post them on a computer, but they actually build up their own meaning, and it's this almost it's like a cross-sectional meaning over time, because there's the first time you see a meme and you might find it funny, but good memes become funnier over time, because suppose you've been seeing the same meme over and over again for 3 months. The latest time you see that meme, you're going to be laughing at whatever new context it's in, plus the memory of every other time that meme has been used. It's this weird, almost integral function of meaning and of humor. How you're basically integrating over time the meaning of the meme, which I don't think Baudrillard had seen, but viewing it in the context of Simulacra and Simulation makes it even funnier and even weirder, and makes me like dumb memes on the funny Bluebird website even more.
So let me see, we've got a couple of topics to touch on here today. Memes. Oh man, I've lost the chat. Yeah, the chat's wiped on my end. So all the notes there before, if you want to copy paste those back. But the memes. Yeah, I don't know. Like the thing is, culture or how would you say, like the idea space, I suppose. Whatever is, we need to come up with like proper terminology to describe what I'm saying, but the informational space of ideas that is, Popper Popper had a good term for it. He called them virtual objects, which I thought was nice because he wrote that in 1972 in what was it called? Objective Knowledge, 1972. He called in one of the essays, he spoke about like this idea of the three worlds. And in another book he calls like in defense of interactionism, or like this idea of like we've got these virtual objects which we imagine in our mind's eye or whatever in our mind, and they're as much a part of the causal story of like why, say, a particular symbol ends up on, like printed on the side on a poster and then slapped on the side of a building. It's like that's a physical phenomena, obviously. Poster, whatever's written on it, whatever symbol, and then it being slapped onto the side of a building. Physical event. Trivial thing to say but it's like, yeah, but what are all of the entities that caused that posters to be slapped on the side of that building with that configuration of atoms? It's not just the things around like the physics of like the adhesive and the forces and stuff, there's also these things like ideas, and those ideas matter just as much, just as causally important. But they exist in like a non-physical kind of part of our minds and our culture, but they have physical effects on the world, right? So, which is quite obvious. It's trivial to say, but when you step back and think like, well, what is actually going on? It means there's almost like an invisible world. There's an invisible world of ideas, and we only see really the consequences of those ideas, and we can only interact with the ideas in our mind. Oh, excuse me. And then we see like the consequences of them in the artifacts that we create or our communication. But the memes have like this independent, somewhat autonomous reality, you know, like for example, with the idea of a clown, like a scary clown. The kids are scared of clowns. And I don't know how many kids have woken up in sweat in the middle of the night because of a nightmare of a clown, like eating them or whatever, like in It, Stephen King's It. And what is that? What is that thing that's visiting them in the night? It's an idea, it's a meme, and it's somewhat autonomous. Like, if they could, they would not have the nightmare, but they can't control it. It's instantiating itself in their mind, and it's causing them to wake up in terror. And to say that that's not real is, to me is like, from Baudrillard, it's like, how is that not real? Like, that's a very real thing. It's just, it's not real in the same way that like some other things could be considered real. It's a different type of reality. That doesn't mean it's not real.
I guess, yeah, you think of substrates in that. So maybe what he's talking about as the real are objects instantiated in non-human substrates, like a rock on the ground is.
Yeah.
Or actually, when he's talking about deterrence, so Baudrillard has this long section about
nuclear deterrence.
It was written during the Cold War, and he says that the existence of nuclear deterrence basically just is this force that recontextualizes everything around it, both for the Soviets and for Americans, and allows. So he's weird because in some ways he'll say things that are identifiably, like, I would consider like paranoid political, not to say that they're wrong, but paranoid political, like the system is using deterrence and the need for security to control everything around it, which is not untrue, actually. So he'll say things like that, but then he'll also say the inner logic of the system precludes the real breaking through at any point, which is why a nuclear exchange is impossible. Because this system of simulation won't allow the real to break through. But I'm saying this to mean that the real for him seems to be just brute physical reality, like a rock, and things that are instantiated outside of humans. I think there is reality, like you were talking about with a clown idea. There's a reality to them, but it's almost this reality instantiated in human minds. So the human consciousness is the substrate of these things.
Dogs. Well, I don't know. Dogs seem to dream, don't they? There's videos of like dogs having, so which is
like running around and stuff in there.
The only reasonable explanation that I can have of that is that they do have some sort of like subjective experience. So they must have a mind.
No, I like the Descartes description of animals apparently having an inner life. It's like, no, they just look like they have an inner life. They don't.
They look as though they have an inner life. But to me, it seems as though the thing that we would need to assume to explain, like, why is Fluffy running in her sleep?
Yeah,
is that she's got an inner life?
Some sort of
I reckon
it's just the devil trying to trick you into thinking that dogs have an inner life.
Presumably, it would be a dream come true of mine if somebody came up with a theory of mind, a good theory of mind that actually explained all of this. That would be amazing in our lifetime. Hey, our audience, if if any of you are particularly interested in the theory of mind, get on our Discord and let us know and like tell us about it, because that would be
I'll
amazing.
steal your idea, publish it,
We'll publish it,
and then talk shit about you the rest of my life. In my Nobel Prize speech, for winning the Nobel Prize, winning all of them, just clean sweep, first person in history. Every category of the Nobel Prize, I just win 1 year for this idea, this theory of mind. And in my acceptance speech, in each acceptance speech, I'm going to name you and talk shit about you.
It's just
so join the Discord.
Join the Discord and tell us. Anyways, where were we getting up to? Sorry.
So
back for a
these simulations, these simulacra, these ideas, I think have reality. They're just they're instantiated in human minds. That's the substrate they exist in. Now I don't know if Baudrillard was saying that these things categorically don't exist when he was calling the physical world external to humans the real. It might just be a terminological thing for him, because one thing about this book that I hated was how it's written. I think it has some really cool ideas in it, and it is fun when he starts taking these cool ideas and applying them to Disneyland
I've got
or to Watergate. But go on.
I've got a substitute. because sometimes people use words and they don't necessarily mean them to have. Like I use a word with in our conversation with Justin, and he took it to have a particular connotation, which I didn't necessarily mean it to have, but it was understandable, and which is fine.
Is that the part we edited out where you started calling him a bitch boy and threatening to kill him?
That's the part. I was like,
I had to delete that.
He was misinterpreting my use of the word bitch boy.
He was interpreting Levi's use of the term, I know your address and I will come to your house, and anyone listening right now, if they do not stop me from coming to his house, is an accomplice to the crime, because I'm announcing my intention to kill him.
Jack, why'd you do this to me? Stop it.
The only reason why it appears that that's not in the episode is because I edited it out so well that you don't notice.
So, anyways, going back to the point. What if we swapped out, here's my proposal, we swap out the word the real for a different word to remove maybe the connotations or some of the connotations, and try to maintain the spirit of what he was saying, which is maybe could we substitute in the concrete, just like the concrete versus the abstract, or the physical versus the cultural, or something like that, or like he's saying something about like the cultural frame of reference and these cultural ideas, or these like the ideas versus the physical, or something like that. Whereas I think he probably wouldn't disregard the thing that I'm saying as, oh no, okay, so actually Levi, it is real. It is real what you're saying, but that's not, that's not that's not the point that he's trying to make. The point that he's trying to make is like there's this world of the human ideas that we've created, the numinous, or whatever you want to call it, like, and that is impinging upon the physical, the concrete world outside of the ideascape. And the current frame of reference in, say, the Cold War was like one that would prohibit those like concrete physical forces and so forth, like the natural things outside of the human ideascape, penetrating into our frame of reference within the numinous landscape of human ideas at that time in history.
Yeah,
would that be
I don't know
a reasonable substitute? I don't know, like
nominal.
Something.
Because I mean,
what do you reckon?
Yeah,
how would you
but
address?
I'm not sure. I think it's like we can keep using real. It's just
with the caveat
knowing what he means, or what he might have meant. Because like I was saying earlier, this book is just pure baguette language. It's so cryptically written, and I just don't think it's necessary.
Is that a translation issue,
something.
or is it because he wrote in French, and maybe at that point in time, like the French?
I reckon
obscure? Or is it just him?
Oh, it's him. It's just it might still be the case, I'm not sure, but at least in the 20th century, it seemed to be a really French thing of writing in this very, very dense way, full of, I suspect, like intentionally provocative, intentionally exaggerated statements, intentionally contradictory statements to shock the reader, which all, like, those are all legitimate techniques to use. It's just in this book, it's such a point where sometimes I'll be groaning reading a page because I think, like, you're saying something cool just in the most obnoxious way possible. This is just such an obnoxiously written book.
So I do think that with regards to memes, though, there is this cool autonomy to them. You know, like they spread autonomously. Yeah. They spread because we, you know, they what's that idea of Dr. Johnson's rock, you know? How do you know the world outside of your mind is real? And he kicks the rock and it's like, I kicked back. I didn't have any control over the fact that I kicked it back. Like, it hurt my foot. I don't want it to hurt my foot. It does, though. It's autonomous and it's complex. And there's so too with memes. They're autonomous and they're somewhat autonomous. They use the human mind and our information communication media as like the substrate to travel around the world and in physical reality. And so they're sort of quasi-autonomous because at the end of the day, they've got to be created by a human mind and replicated by humans. But they're also doing it somewhat like autonomously, like independently of any particular individual's will. Well,
not even that. They'll have certain characteristics which make them spread. So say simplicity or memorability.
Yeah.
There are a bunch of different characteristics they can have which make humans reproduce them.
Yeah, and then there's presumably ones that we don't see very often because they don't compete very well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and actually, presumably that's the vast majority of the memes, actually, are ones that don't compete well. And we only see, like, the substantive part of our culture is, like, the ones that have competed well continuously replicating themselves and taking up, like, the lion's share of our communication and information storage media and so forth. And mind space. You know, like, one of the things I was thinking about recently was about attention, right? Like, we've been thinking a lot about, like, you know, building the audience, like trying to get better at engaging with our fans and stuff and all this sort of thing. And at the end of the day, like, the Austrian economists and so forth and the classical economists like to say that everything is like a positive sum game in economics, but actually there's this one place that they're actually wrong. They're really wrong. There is actually a finite amount of human attention, and it's the population times roughly 16 hours per day. Maybe more if you wanted to, like, start like putting ads in our sleep and shit. But that's
parallel processing. You can like, you can be watching something, you can be scrolling on your phone. I'm sure, I don't know, you could have some, like, pleasant sensation in your non-scrolling hand as well. You can maybe encode advertising information in that. Scent. You got 5 senses, got 4 limbs. I'm seeing a lot of different surfaces onto which you can stream advertising. Because that's all I care about. All I care about is maximizing advertising per unit time into the human organism.
You could double it, right? You could double it by just giving everybody a what's the corpus callosum? Callosum. Like, just cut everybody's corpus callosum, and then we have doubled the human population without doubling the number of bodies.
You've got 2 eyes. You could train someone to view 2 different advertisements, of one with each eye, and understand them both.
You don't need to train them, you just cut their brain in half. You know,
or don't give them a choice.
Your hemispheres don't need to communicate with one another in order for you to survive.
That is right.
It's convenient. It's a nice convenience, but it's like kidneys. It's like you can lose one.
Yeah.
So, anyways, going back to the point, like, there is, for any population size N of people, there is actually a definite finite. It is actually zero sum, and the marketers and the attention technologists and stuff at places like Google and Facebook, and also us as, as content creators, competing in a somewhat zero-sum. It's a very big market because obviously that's a lot of time, and there's a lot of people. But it's still on some level zero-sum. Like, you can't get out of it. It's not like other forms of economic exchange where you have this like positive sum dynamic. There is actually this pure zero-sum dynamic when it's like, if you're going to give us an hour of your time, that's an hour of your time that you could have given to another content creator. So we better be good. We better be bringing our A game here, Jack.
No, I think we should be invading alien planets. It's like there was mercantilism and colonialism earlier, where, you know, a power would invade another and then just start dumping their goods on that market to sell them. Well, humans could invade other planets so that we can just dump content creation on them. We can invade so that we can
take our memes,
can force our podcasts on them. We can force big Chungus memes on them.
We just make them dumber. The way that we destroy our enemies in space in the intergalactic war is we just like blast our memes at them. Take that. Speed of light.
No. This comes after defeating them in war. This is the purpose of the war. To find new markets for content.
To increase the mind share, yeah.
To Mr. Beast the entire galaxy.
Oh, man.
We're the plague of the stars. We will destroy everything an alien species loves, just so we can get some more potential vectors for attention. So that PewDiePie can hit
out into
200 trillion subscribers on YouTube.
200 trillion.
That's all I want.
Yeah. So next,
when I'm president, I will make this a reality
without getting your head blown off.
Yeah,
preferably. So the next topic is: did you want to talk about computers in particular?
Yeah, computers are cool because he talked about computers a bit in
it wasn't as big
Simulacra and Simulation, but just because when it was written, he obviously didn't have access to consumer computing like we do today.
Yeah.
But he did see its potential for replication, which was cool. And it was far-sighted considering the state of computing at the time, particularly for consumers. Because Baudrillard was really interested in what happens if you just keep replicating the same thing. And a computer is really good at that. Like, you can basically replicate some object an arbitrary number of times. Eventually you'll hit resource constraints, but if it's a little text file or a small image, you don't hit that limit for a very long time. You can do a lot of replication, especially when you start connecting computers over the internet. I guess this ties into what we were saying about memes. Your ability to replicate things, if you can do it fast enough and easily enough, seems to change the quality of what's going on, where they do start to get their own almost associative inertia with them, like with a meme. I was saying earlier, all of your memories of interacting with it previously emotionally valence how you are currently interacting with it. And to an extent, that probably happens with any object that you see multiple times. But with things that you can replicate rapidly and distribute rapidly and then have rapid responses to, that process is sped up so much that it becomes so much stronger. And you do get, we're just talking about memes again, you do get the current meme landscape, which I again really wish that Jean Baudrillard could have seen.
He would have flipped out. I think he would have.
Yeah.
He would have gone to pretty much written like another 10 books just having a panic attack about the replication of Pepe the Frog across the
Oh
the
man, yeah. What would he have thought of frog posting? Should have just blown his mind.
It's beyond dumb. Yeah.
It does beg the question though, and this is one of my bigger criticisms of this book, that Jean Baudrillard acts like we've crossed over into something really new with our relationship to, I guess he wouldn't call them symbols, because he said that a symbol mediates your interaction with the real. Whereas he's saying, well, we actually just can't access the real anymore. We can't recognize it at the very least. So there are no more symbols. There are just simulacra in simulation. But I just don't know when humans didn't exist in a state that was, to a large extent, of our own creation, when we didn't exist within our own minds and within our own mental schema of the world. Sure, maybe those are more dense, more dense in the 80s when he wrote this, and certainly denser today just because of modern telecommunications technology. But I'm just not sure there was a time when what he's talking about here wasn't the case. I guess my problem is Baudrillard is not Baudrillard enough. This just seems to be a human, like just an aspect of being human.
Yeah, well, you could take that argument all the way to the point of saying, like, well, what about you don't actually ever experience, like, even the things that you're touching, you experience a representation generated by your mind. And, you know, like, we can even do things like, you know, do a nerve block in your spine and stop the signal transduction of, like, okay, well, your physical body is having, like, you know, I don't know, like a baby cut out of you. If you're getting a C-section, right? And you've got a nerve block. And it's like, but that the signals, that information is not getting into your central nervous system being processed by that part of your nervous system which is responsible for generating your conscious experience. And so you don't even if you stripped away all culture, all ideas, and you just went out, like walked off into the bush, into the forest to live as a naked hermit, you still couldn't get away from this. Like, you're not actually interacting with the forest, you're interacting with your nervous system's generated representation of the forest.
Because I guess I'm trying to think of, I'm trying to be Baudrillard bot, and being Baudrillard bot is something that I'm sure Baudrillard would have loved.
Yeah, go give it a try.
Because I guess, so he does with the representation thing. I'm pretty sure he would have denied that representation was possible now, or at the time of writing. Because again, representation, it's representing something from the real. And he, I imagine, would say we can't access that, or we don't know what is real and what isn't. All that's being, instead of traditional representation, which is, you know, there's something in the world, it is represented to us through symbols, and we understand those symbols. It's just another part of simulation being represented to us by simulacra. So it's just not cashing out, but. Maybe when I was talking about when are we not just inhabiting our own simulatory worlds, maybe it is, you said earlier, like when you're born, maybe it's then. But when your brain is so underdeveloped.
No, but babies have experience. They start experiencing stuff from like
straight up Dasein.
Like when do they start, when do you think babies start having, or like what do you say, like when does a person that hasn't been born yet, at what point are they actually having experiences and have some sort of internal life? Presumably it's not at conception, but presumably it's a long time before they're born, so there's some intermittent period there. It's like a superposition of like,
yes, okay, so maybe
and conscious.
Maybe there's some sort of amniotic state, some intrauterine state where we're not in Baudrillard land. But I mean, at the very least, by the time a child is verbal, I think they're living in Baudrillard land. And again, still, my biggest criticism of this book is that he pretends like this is something new. Maybe the only escape is being sufficiently neurologically underdeveloped that you can't make these mental schemas you get lost in. That's the way out. That's the exit. Brain damage.
I don't know, man.
Severe head trauma is the way out of simulation.
And haven't they, you know, there's these interesting studies where it's like there's not such a clear distinction between our culture and our physical environment, like our cultural environment, our physical environment. One example of this is like if you, I don't know if I'm sure there's been clinical study of people who have had the circumstances to make these inferences on, but you can't actually do this sort of thing to a human because it would be highly illegal. But they have done,
hard to get ethics approval.
But they have done these things where they like will blind like a mouse or a rhesus monkey or whatever when they're born, so they'll like cover their eyes up, or put them in the dark or whatever, and then they're like visual cortex doesn't develop properly, and even when they then expose them to light at some point later in their life, they will still be functionally blind because their neural circuitry hasn't like developed. So a lot of like postnatal neural development requires the actual stimulus to be there to prompt, to constrain or guide or prompt neural development of different parts of your brain, right? So I'm just wondering whether or not like there's also elements of that with culture. Like if you just had a kid and you didn't expose them to any language until they were like 5, just like had them in an environment where they were never spoken to, like would there be parts of their brain like Wernicke's area or Broca's area that would just be like sufficiently malnourished, so to speak, that like they wouldn't be able to interact culturally with other people? Because like language is such an important part of culture, obviously. So yeah, I have questions like that. It's like it's not clear that we can even have like a person that exists outside of like the culture. Like it would just be that's part of like we're part of this what would you call it? Almost like in my head I'm thinking like Flubber, you know, Flubber, the movie.
Oh, the movie? The Robin Williams?
Yeah, like the little flubbery thing, you know, like there's this invisible like gel that is the so where our bodies are in this like invisible gel, and if we try to go outside of that bubble of culture, actually, and as we just put our physical body out into the environment and we're no longer attached to some sort of culture, we're actually going to die because like human bodies are actually in as far as animals go, like really quite unremarkable. And the only reason why we can do what we do is because we've got like our technology and like our culture and stuff. So I don't know. I think that like separating the two is not, I don't see how you can have a separation between like a human existence like not being real, like this thing that's the real, and then whatever else is like, I don't know, I'm not convinced that such a distinction can be made.
Yeah, it's fuzzy, but again, this might just be my interpretation of very, very unclear prose. Extremely
maybe I'm missing something
prose
here. That's why it'd be cool to like. That's why it was cool to talk to Justin. Honestly, before recording this post, because he clarified a lot. Essentially,
a lot,
because he actually knows how to, or he has the patience to like really sit down and like not just the patience, like he really finds it really, as he said, he found it thrilling. Whereas I found it like, man, why are you writing like this, man? Okay, read it.
Like I keep saying, the prose is horrible. I can see the thrilling part, because there are parts of this book that are really funny and fun, because he's got these thoughts about reproduction and the copy without an original, and then he'll do things like apply it to Disneyland and just make the most outrageous claims. And it's hard to tell if he's being serious or trying to be funny.
Yeah.
I interpreted some of these claims as just being funny, but I don't know if that was the intention. He's got this bit about Disneyland near the start of the book where he goes, the real reason why Disneyland exists is because, so Disneyland is this obviously fake world contained within a city, and it's within Anaheim. And the thing is, the city outside of Disneyland is fake. It's not real. But what Disneyland does is by presenting itself as so unreal, it makes the city outside of it appear real. And this is the actual reason why Disneyland exists. And I read that and thought, yeah, I'm on board with this. This is like, I'm having fun with this.
Yeah,
this is good.
Yeah. So why don't we move on to our next topic? We've got artificial intelligence, LLMs, robotics, the Matrix, and brain in a vat. So I asked Justin about what he thinks of AI in this respect, and he made an interesting point. He's like, well, what about robotics? Like so my comment, I guess we're attaching this.
People are going to be hearing these two things as if we just recorded one after the other.
In the conversation, like, sorry, this is like a week later or 2 weeks later.
2 weeks.
That we're recording. So, anyways, I think Justin made a really good point. Is like, well, what about robotics? Like, the AI in robotics has to interact with the real world and it's getting feedback from the real world, and I think that's good. Absolutely true. I think that's a good point. I guess if I constrained my thinking to LLMs, did you have any thinking about like that whole class of technologies with respect to simulation and simulacra, Jack?
Yeah, I guess I'll just be speaking out loud. Also because I'm far from an expert on LLMs. It is. Again, it's the sort of thing that I wish Baudrillard were around to experience. What happens if you get a model and feed it a huge amount of human data, human language data from the internet, to the point where it can respond to questions using, very good English and other languages too. Like, it speaks a bunch of languages really, really well, and come up with apparently novel thoughts, but ones which, when you dig deeper, I'm not sure. I guess it depends on how you define creativity. If you're just recombining different bits of information that you're already aware of, then I guess LLM's creative. But it's cool that it's almost a new step in reproduction. So you've got reproduction, like we talked about earlier, of just like copying an image on a computer. And LLM it's almost the evolution of that, where it's not even copying something anymore. Instead, it's just being fed just a lot of what people have already said. And then it reproduces those by just recombining all of these bits and then giving you a new output in response to a query. It's almost reproduction pushed beyond mere reproduction.
Yeah.
It's this new stage.
Yeah, for sure.
I guess, too, like, it'd be interesting to talk to someone who is actually an expert in how LLMs work, who could tell us to what extent is it, I guess it's not a search necessarily, but to what extent is it making genuinely novel responses to queries? To what extent is it regurgitating information in a slightly novel way? Either way, it's a cool form of reproduction.
Yeah. And there's, it's strictly speaking, it's not detached from the real world in the sense that it's called reinforcement learning with human feedback. It's like they've got this mechanism where they're adapting the response to the users. That's why you can say something, no, that response wasn't very good or whatever. No, you got this thing wrong, So you can, and you can also adjust the temperature and all these other parameters. Like, so no, it's not completely detached from the real world. No, no. With regards to like the new level of reproducibility, I think this is a challenging one because there's, how do I put this? It's very good. This is why I think Turing's mistake, I suppose, or like the Turing test is not. It's a false guidepost for like making progress if you're talking about artificial general intelligence, because these things apparently we can make something that is very good at apparently creating the illusion of thinking under constrained context, like a text interface. But if you leave it with enough people for long enough, eventually people will find out, oh yeah, here's, if you do this to it, if you do that to it, like you can see it's not really thinking. And it seems as though like whatever it is that humans are doing to create the outward appearance of genuine thinking to another human, just because you can make something that simulates that in its outward experience doesn't mean that whatever's generating that is also thinking. And that's the mistake that people like, there's like Hitch, I think of his name, the guy who wrote the big artificial, he wrote machine learning textbook. He wrote one of the big machine learning textbooks from Toronto. Really like amazing researcher.
No, we need more controversy on this podcast. I don't care if you actually think that he's an amazing researcher and you just disagree with some point he made. I think you should just start trash talking him.
Yeah, I know, right? Damn, Hitch. I think his last name's not Judea Pearl. Somebody else. I'll find his fucking name at some point. Anyways, people who study all know who I'm talking about. It's a Canadian researcher, and him and a bunch of the others, including like the guy who's heading up like the ML research at Facebook and stuff. They're making this mistake where they think that's like, okay, if we're generating something that can like create these predictions of like what token to create next, that therefore like the underlying algorithm must be thinking. But just because like when you're talking, I can guess what you're maybe going to say next, it doesn't mean that like if I can create another algorithm that's going to make a probabilistic thing, a probabilistic guess of like what you're going to say next, doesn't mean that that other algorithm is thinking. And the reason why is there could be a whole bunch of prediction algorithms, but there's only one thinking algorithm that we know of. And from David Deutsch's argument, there's a universality to it. So any two thinking algorithms, there'll be like isomorphisms between the two of them, and they're actually equivalent. So like, it all sort of falls apart. What we have instead is we have these like really, I don't know, like sophisticated replication machines. And that's how I think a better way to think of them is like you can load up, say, like all of the work of Dostoevsky and ask it to create a new piece of writing that feels like it could have been written by Dostoevsky in style and tone. But at the end of the day, like if we actually had Dostoevsky here, he could have a thought that only Dostoevsky could have had. Because I think the key thing with like, say, Popper's epistemology is
imagine Dostoevsky with access to online gambling. That would have been, would be beautiful. Poor man was born too early.
Too early, yeah. Like Popper's epistemology, I'd harp on about a lot here, but like, I think the best way to think of Popper's epistemology is as a problem-solving epistemology. It's about problem solving, and the thing is, the only entities that we know of in the universe that have problems are people. Like the AI chatbot doesn't like have a problem. It just takes an input and maps it to an output. But when Dostoevsky is like writing, was it like War and Peace or The Brothers? Like
no, it was Tolstoy.
That was Tolstoy. So like Karamazov.
Karamazov.
Yeah, Karamazov. Like he was trying to solve a problem, and when you ask a computer to do something, even these LLMs, they're not trying to solve anything. They're not like trying to think through anything. They're just like spitting back what you've asked it to do. They're just mapping inputs to outputs. Whereas people,
have you everyone around me?
And I don't know. Like I think there's this idea of like, how to put it? Okay, so when you read the original Turing paper on universal computing, at 36, his 36 paper, like he took for granted and everybody in computing takes this for granted, that you're feeding something into the computer. But the question is, so the input to the algorithm. But the question is, why did you pick that particular input? Why are you trying, like, there's this idea of a problem. Where did the problem come from? The computer doesn't have a problem. The computer will just take the input, do its computation, and spit back a result. And that's the same thing with these LLMs. They're not trying to solve anything. The thing that has the problem was Turing. When he sat down, he had no like input other than the problem of like the problem in mathematics at the time, that like the decision problem. And the decision problem, like if you think about the nature of problems, it's saying it's like there's actually a lack of a proper input to put into this. We don't know what to do with it. And then the person is coming along and figuring out, oh, okay, like if we do this new thing, we can solve that problem. And so we don't even have a theory of like what even is a problem and what does it even mean for a problem to have been solved. And yet we've got these chatbots which can like create this like very compelling replica of like spitting inputs and spitting out outputs from a given input probabilistically, and like taking its corpus of data underneath and like remixing it in really interesting ways. But you can't say like, what are you interested in? What are you interested in? Well, if I ask Gemini or ChatGPT what is it interested in, it's going to be interested in whatever the engineers have told it to be interested in, or whatever the pre-existing, like the context window of the pre-existing chat says for it to be interested in. It doesn't have any interests of its own. It doesn't have any problems. Yeah. Anyway, sorry, that was a long
I guess
diatribe.
There are a few things. There are a bunch of places to go from that.
Yeah.
One is the nature of what a problem is. At least in my mind, what a problem requires is some sort of agent that can envision some sort of change or a possible future which is distinct from the present. Because say with I don't know, asteroids, there's
Asteroids
no
don't have problems.
concept of a problem for an asteroid. Like they orbit a body and that's what they do. It's not like an asteroid has a conception of a possible future where it is in, I don't know, where like a particular orientation that it is not presently. Yeah. However, if you had an asteroid which was an agent, suddenly the concept of a problem becomes real if it can see or in some way conceptualize being in a state that is different from where it is at that point. It has some sort of desire, or you can describe it in some different way. But it has agency, foresight, desire, and then you've got a space of potential actions that it can take to try to get to whatever desired future state it has. And at least in my mind, that's what makes problems and solutions. And then it's not to say that, you have then a single problem that is mapped to a single solution. It's this huge field within which you can have basically an infinite number of solutions, and they're going to be selected based on which achieve the goals that that particular agent has come up with, which are accessible to that agent, which the agent is able to conceive of at a particular time. So and that sort of state doesn't feel like an LLM. An LLM doesn't feel like it can get to that state. Also, going back to what you were talking about with Dostoevsky and writing something in the style of Dostoevsky, that's really interesting because that opens up a new avenue in replication. So, of course, previously humans could try to write something in the style of Dostoevsky, but LLMs are cool in that they can automate the reproduction of more complex or more abstract things than just, say, copying an image. Like copying an image on a computer is cool in terms of reproduction, but LLMs do open up more abstract forms of replication, like write me out the first few verses of the Book of Genesis in the style of Raymond Chandler. That's super abstract form of replication, and it's actually an intersection of different replications. So you're replicating the start of the Book of Genesis. You're replicating the style of William Faulkner. Oh, actually, no, Faulkner wrote in such a biblical way that you probably wouldn't notice a difference. But yes, delicious tacos. You're right in the style of delicious tacos.
What's his name? Who did the dinosaur?
It's opened up all of these new avenues of replication and automated your ability to intersect a bunch of different replications at once. So that's a cool thing that LLMs are doing.
It's really cool.
Baudrillard
it's really quite
land.
amazing. Look, everything I say is not to discredit how amazing the LLM technology is these days. Like, it's absolutely
No, I'm talking shit about it. We're programming Book Club from Hell bot, which is gonna be AGI. We are coding up AGI as we speak. I barely know how to code. Doesn't matter. I've got an outsider's perspective on coding. That's my strength when it comes to coding AGI. I see things that people who've been brainwashed by things like maths or knowing how computers work.
You've seen all that stuff.
I could break out of those boxes.
What's that guy's name? Terrence Howard? Is that Terrence? Have you seen all that stuff? Terrence Howard.
The
Neil deGrasse Tyson and he went on Joe Rogan with
Weinstein. One of the
Weinstein, yeah.
The physics Weinstein, not the biology Weinstein.
Eric Weinstein. It was so good. Eric Weinstein was so self-restrained. It was like just not just, just like, man, how do you not like? He had so much patience. The man's a saint.
That's really unusual because in
other settings,
one
Eric's
of the reasons why I
hot-headed.
stopped listening to him was because I found him just so condescending to all of his guests.
Yeah.
I was like, no, I can't deal with this. That's unusual that he was that restrained.
He was very restrained, and I mean, he still occasionally said, in not so few words, "You're a dumbass." Stop saying. But he said it in a very nice way, and. Similarly, like, I found Eric on a number of interviews that he did to be condescending in a way that I found hard to listen to. I don't know, maybe he
But Eric, if you want to come on our show.
But the way that he
more than welcome.
Handled Terrence Howard was it was quite amazing. I was like, where this like change of heart from Eric. He didn't just come in here and just rip him. Yeah, it was quite cool. Anyway, so back to imagine getting Terrence bot on the Terrence Howard bot. Feed all of Terrence Howard's ramblings into. Thing is, like, it's really cool art that he's made, and he's got some interesting. He obviously likes
because he made art.
This like his exploration
Terrence
into maths and physics was based on him. Like, it seemed like, unless I've got the wrong read on it, seems like he was
Terrence Howard's Sacred Geometry.
Yeah,
this looks like woo woo.
Yeah,
these are woo woo graphics.
Yeah, he loves the geometry, the weird shapes and stuff, which is cool. I mean, I love fractals as well.
Yeah,
he's really into like multi-dimensional, like three-dimensional fractal shapes and stuff. Yeah, he's flipping out. He's like having a total stoner trip on. But he's just like, Terrence, mate. Like, we all love when we're high as fuck to like look at like fractals and geometry and stuff. Like, we're all
stare at Mandelbrot animations.
But doesn't mean that like you figured out something that like generations of people who have dedicated their lives to this stuff haven't figured out. Like,
I mean, when I've taken LSD in Minecraft, I too think that I've discovered something that generations of humans will remember me for.
When I get high,
it's more when I come down that I realize that I was just staring at patterns in the carpet.
Yeah, when I get high as fuck on cannabis in Tasmania with my legal weed, because I've got a prescription and I'm allowed to. So fuck yeah. We're slowly getting more rights down here in the southern continent. I look at these like Americans on YouTube and they're like punching billies and stuff, like punching like fat cones. And this guy is like in Colorado or something. And it's like, man, so much freedom. So much freedom. Just in Colorado, wherever he's from. Anyway, so like with Terrence, it's like this is going to be the height It's going to be the height of hypocrisy, what I'm about to say. I'm
it doesn't matter.
Full
This is our
self-awareness.
show. We can do what we want.
Know how hypocritical this is. But for Terrence Howard to come out with as big a platform as he has, and to go onto as big a platform as Joe Rogan, and just completely disregard the life work of thousands, tens of thousands of mathematicians and physicists who have spent collectively probably hundreds, if not tens of thousands of years worth of time debating with one another and exploring the space of abstract truths and physics and geometry and stuff, and for him just be like, I figured it out. Like, you guys are all wrong.
I love that confidence.
It's like, okay, but can you do a proof? Do a proper proof.
No, that's not important. You see, Levi, what you're not understanding is science and maths are based on two things.
Yeah.
Confidence and looks. That's all that matters. Like, that's it. How does he look, actually? Is he...
He was pretty good looking back in the day. Yeah, today he's kind of, he's a bit older,
young.
But he's not...
That's how...
He's taking care of himself.
He's
He's doing all right, he's fine.
Yeah, he's all right. Yeah, so I'll believe him.
I mean, if I was looking
compared
back good when I was like... Because he's got to be like 50, right? Like, Terrence Howard.
Yeah. Terrence Howard.
Man, I think he's looking damn good for 55 years old. Like, for 55 years old, he's looking great. He's obviously
yeah, so I reckon... And he's okay. So he's got the looks, he's got the confidence, so he's right. What more do you want? Academic journals should just be a picture of a person naked, the people who publish the article, and then a bunch of their quotes, high energy quotes, in a big font, bright colors, and whoever has the better looking photos, whoever has bigger fonts, bolder fonts, brighter colors is right.
Yeah, for sure. So, anyways, back to simulation and Simulacra. Sort of completely derailed the conversation. Sorry. Let's move on to our next point of conversation. Were there any times in human history where we did not interact with the world through symbols? Yeah, sorry, I was just reading through. No, in fact, isn't that like some of the earliest forms of, like, archaeologically? That's like what we look for. We look for like these ancient pieces of art, like 50,000 years old, or like burial. Like one of the big discoveries here in Australia was like these remains, and what they found on them was like burial, like what would you call it? Like just things that people are buried with. Is it called burial rites or something like that? Necklaces and all that sort of stuff. And that's an indication, obviously, that the people at that time had like culture. Stuff, and they were like, they were not just bonobos running around like
it's like okay, well they know what death is. They're conceiving of something that came after death. They're preparing for it.
They've got technology. They've got clothes. They know how to create like jewelry and shit. Like, and also they've come all the fucking way from like Africa, so like over to Australia. So they know like how to survive in climates that we weren't evolved for and in environments that we weren't evolved for. So like. And that's going back like tens of thousands of years. And like, what's one of the oldest rock paintings? Like that one in France. It's like 100,000
in Lascaux,
yeah. Like, how old is that one? It's got to be like 100,000 years old or something.
Old.
And that's like one of the first things that we see is like, if we find a tool. Okay, so like chimpanzees. You know what chimpanzees do, Jack? When they're fighting, sometimes one troop of chimpanzees is fighting another troop of chimpanzees. They'll like pick up sticks and they'll drag them behind them. But they won't necessarily throw them or anything like that. They'll just like drag, and it seems to be some sort of display of like size or something like that. But they haven't yet had this. It was one group of people, tribes people, like having a confrontation with another group of tribes people. Like, it's not just picking up sticks and just dragging them around. It's like picking them up, turning them into weapons, like modifying them in some way. And all of that's an indirect indication, as like Popper says, like, and Deutsch say, like, we explain the seen in terms of the unseen. And the thing that we're not seeing when we look at these ancient archaeological remains is obviously the thought processes of the people that created these symbols or the technologies, the stone tools and so forth. But obviously, like stones just don't turn themselves into axe heads magically. There was a process, there was an algorithm that the crafter had. So there must have been like the person was thinking. They had some image, they had virtual objects in their mind, and they had a design that they were going, and they had a goal, and the stone, the obsidian blade, or the portrait of the person hunting a deer on the wall in France or wherever is a small piece of indirect evidence that there was actually a thought process of the person who created those things. So it almost by definition, I would imagine that from the day we stopped being just a proto-human to being a person. So this is the weird thing. If you actually take Deutsch's idea of a person seriously, if it's universal, then it's actually 1 and 0. It's actually it's a hard binary, and which is really weird. It's not a gradient. Like and that's another mistake that the people in the AI are making. If Deutsch is right, which he might not be right, obviously, but if Deutsch is right, that this thing that we've got to deal with is this idea of universality, not just general computation, but general explanatory understanding of the universe. It's not this gradient, exponential or otherwise, between cockroach, chimpanzee, human. It's like we're not on the same axis. This is a separate thing. What we're doing is separate to what chimpanzees are doing, and it doesn't matter if you just ramp up the chimpanzee's neural network and just give them 1 billion times more neurons that as they're not running the right software. That it's a software issue. That like it doesn't matter how much computational power you give a bonobo or a chimpanzee or silicon chip. If it doesn't have the right hardware, if it doesn't have the right software on it, you're not going to get a person out the other end. And actually,
maybe could you just say quickly what David Deutsch's idea of a person is? Because like I know what it is because I've read his book, but a listener might not.
Yeah. Okay. So a universal explainer. So what is an explanation? The easiest way to think of an explanation is probably just like a story that's supposed to account for the facts. Okay, there's a lot going on there, but essentially, like a story, obviously linguistically, just a narrative. But if we think a little bit more broadly, a story can include all sorts of what I think of in my head as I call it representational infrastructure. So representational infrastructure is any symbol that you could use. So like I can tell a story with like a diagram, with natural language, with a computer algorithm, with a film, storyboard. There's all this representational infrastructure that we could use to tell a story. But at the end of the day, whatever representation that I've created is not the thing itself. It is supposed to correspond to the thing, and to the degree that my story is true is the degree to which it does in fact correspond to the thing in reality. And with all that being said, by explanation, what we really mean is like, if the explanation is we can tell stories that aren't supposed to correspond to anything. But if we're trying to tell a story that does correspond to something, then it matters that it does actually correspond to the thing. So like a scientific theory is actually supposed to correspond to the world. Now, with all that being said, a universal explainer. So universality, for people who haven't studied computer science, a universal computer is any computer is universal if and only if it is the case that it can simulate any other computer. And if there's some arbitrary constraint on a computer's ability to simulate another computer, then it is not universal. And so what we mean is that, like, for a classical computer, so like running in a single universe, like the computers that we have these days, like your MacBook or whatever you're using in front of you, it's a universal, it's a one universe computer. It's only worrying about like performing computations on a single instance of like the physical computer. And but with that constraint in mind, given enough time, and if you want to, like, do stuff in parallel and stuff, given enough computational power, enough memory, and enough time, it can simulate anything else in the universe. just going to put an asterisk there. That's not technically true because of quantum phenomena, but I'm going to put that aside for a sec and not come back to that. We'll come back to that during our quantum ontology episode.
I'm looking forward. That arrived a few weeks ago.
Yeah,
I flicked through that book.
The cover's crazy. The cover's fucking crazy. Anyway, so like the computers, right?
Anyway,
so a universal computer is one that can explain. Is one that can simulate any other computer. But because a computer is just a physical system, well, okay. So what's the correspondence between computing and physics? Okay, this is a really important point. Like, there's you've got to link. You've got to like in your head link the world of software, the world of algorithms to the underlying hardware somehow, right? Like how do you do that link, right? Well, the link is that I'm going to walk through very quickly the correspondence. The correspondence is, if you imagine in your head like a table, 2x2 table, and we're going to do some rows. On the left-hand side of the table is physical system. On the right-hand side of the table of the correspondence is computation. Okay, so row 1, physical system, has a starting state. So you have like whatever your physical system is, you have like some parameters which can be like given like values, like number values, like real numbers or integers or whatever. And that's your starting state of the system. You know, a one that everybody would learn in like high school physics is like, projectile. Like starting state of the system is like its velocity and its mass and stuff. Okay, the next row of the computation. Well, every single computation has an input. There's an input. Next row, every physical system has a final state. Final state of the system where the parameters of the system have a different number value. Well, every single computation has a final state. There's a final state. The output of the system is the final state. And in between the start state and the end state, every physical system has to evolve through deterministic laws of motion for that for the system in question, where like for each time step you can predict what the next number value for those parameters will be. So that is to say, there's deterministic laws of motion. Well, for every single computation to get from like one iteration of, or like one step in the computation, there's an algorithm. There's a recipe. The algorithm is like telling the computer like what to do. So we now have like initial states, dynamic laws of motion, final state, all encoded by physical parameters of the system, which can take on number values. And we have on the right-hand side of the table, the computation, which is like the input for the variables, some algorithm telling like how the variables change, and then an output state. With all that being said, all we have to do is basically map like our algorithms, our input states, like our input memory. Like you need to have somewhere to like store things with memory and all that sort of stuff. But like essentially what you do is you just map the idea of like start states of a system to like the input states of like your computational system. Then you map like the laws of motion that you're dealing with to like the algorithm. In our case, it's like a universal computer. So like the way that like the computers actually work. And then you need like an output handler. So you actually like map this software idea onto like underlying onto, what would you say? Numerical parameters of the physical system that can take on numerical values. And then we can map that up into the software space, like into the abstract world. And you obviously, like, the electrical engineers and stuff, like, do all the magic that they do, like map it into like operating systems and all that sort of shit, which is absolutely amazing that they can do that. But the kind of underlying principle is fairly simple. With all that being said, if we dial back to like way
Take a
before
breath.
that, okay. With all that being said, I hope you can see, therefore, that every single physical system is actually a computation. And every single computation has to occur in a physical system. And what that means is that since every physical system is a computation, every physical system is in fact a computer, it's just not a universal computer. Every physical system is a non-universal computer, where for any time t, we're going to map to time t plus 1 according to some laws of motion, that all of that's being encoded by parameters that can take on, like, by, physical parts of the system that can take on, like, numerical values, blah, 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 blah. The thing that's special about what Turing figured out is that, well, there's a very special type of physical system which has this property of universality, and that universality property enables it to simulate any other computer. In other words, since all physical systems are themselves computers, non-universal computers, a universal computer can simulate any physical system. What's very special about universal computers, they can simulate anything, including one another. With all that being said, if we then think about explanations, when Deutsch says what's a universal explainer, what he's saying is a person is a universal explainer. By universal, we mean there is no thought that one universal explainer could have that another universal explainer in principle couldn't also have. Otherwise, they're not universal. It breaks the principle. Now, that universality is not even, it's transitively imbued upon the the person by virtue of the fact that we're also running universal computers. Like, in order to run the person algorithm, it has to be running on a universal computer. Like, so our brains are, like, there's some Turing universality to our brains. Point in case, you can sit down and learn how to, like, run any algorithm you want. You're just going to do it really slowly with a lot of errors, but you can do it. And all that being said,
so that's what a person is.
That's what a person is a universal explainer, is something that can understand the world and in principle can create any explanation that can represent any part of the world. And it can also, what's also really interesting about it is, like, we can also represent things that don't exist in the physical world in actual fact. And that's, like, fiction, right? Like, but there are fictional worlds. You can make statements about fictional worlds that can be true or false objectively according to the structure of that world. It's not just hocus pocus. You can't just say whatever you want, like, because there's truths that hold within those worlds that we create, and we're creating an explanation of that physical world. So the universality of explanations gives us reach beyond what physically exists. It enables us to think of possible worlds, of fiction, also of alternative theories. Every single theory that we've created is wrong. Newton created a false theory, and it was his ability to create a false theory that had high enough correspondence compared to the theories before him that enabled us to make progress. It was pretty cool. So, like, it's quite an amazing thing. Now, back to the original thing of what we were saying. Why was I talking about universal computers in the first place? And universal...
You were talking about
people. Universal
people,
explainers and stuff.
I think it was in the context of a person's ability to make a schematized world and live within a schematized world, which Baudrillard in this book seems to be saying is a new phenomenon that we get lost in.
Oh, yes.
In these models we have of the world. And I think both of us were saying that there probably wasn't a state when this wasn't the case.
So last little point to make about that is that, like, okay, so clearly other animals have some form of culture, it seems. Chimps maybe have something, like they have memes. Gorillas and chimps seem to have very rudimentary memes. Even this like dragging the six. It's not clear to me that that's, as far as I'm aware, that's not encoded in their DNA. That actually seems to be something that certain troops have picked up, like it's a cultural meme. And also orangutans and stuff, they'll mimic. So they'll see like humans putting sticks in the water and getting fish out, and the orangutans will mimic what the humans are doing. They'll mimic the motions, but they don't have an explanation. They haven't created an explanation. They haven't created a model of the world in their head that's like, oh, that stick is sharp, and that human over there has found fish and is able to spear the fish. It's just like kind of mechanically replicating stick, water, fish. Like there's not actually there's no underlying model there. It's just doing the replication without the model. And so what we're looking for when we're looking at early human stuff is like this indication of like, no, there was a mind that had a model of the world, and that model could create things. You know, a great example is the French rock painting. Obviously, the person who created that painting knew that the little squiggles on the wall didn't actually look like a deer. It doesn't look like a deer. It's a representation of a deer. But the person and the people around it understood, and even us 100,000 years later can clearly see that it's a representation of the deer. But if you showed a dog or if you showed an orangutan that wall, it's not clear to me that they would infer that those squiggles on the wall are supposed to be deers. You know? Does that make any sense at all? Or am I just like too far fucking cooked at this point?
No, I think it's like, I guess maybe... I think probably Baudrillard wouldn't dispute that people have always had culture.
Yeah.
I think what he seems to be saying is now is an unusual time because we've crossed over into a state where we're so ensconced in our models of the world that we can't see the real anymore, or at least we can't recognize it, because every part of our models of the world, instead of at some final stage cashing out into reality or referring to reality, instead all of them just refer to other bits of mental models that people have, and it just lifts off the ground.
Yeah.
But again, I think it's probably always been the case.
Yeah, it's
yeah, I don't know.
It's pretty wild. Are there any other questions here that
I think that's basically
would be interesting to?
I think it's basically everything.
Yeah.
Would you recommend this book? Actually?
Yeah, sure. It's thought provoking. If you like the way that it's not my style of writing that I particularly like, but that's a stylistic thing. It's not really the substance of what he's saying is really interesting.
Yeah, I would say something similar. I would recommend this to a particular type of person.
Yeah,
like if you're an advanced baguette enjoyer. If you're
philosophical,
like if you're really used to this particular way of writing, then there are a lot of really fun, cool ideas in this book, which are probably more relevant today than when they were written, especially with computers and modern telecommunications technology. They're really cool to think about. But just given how this book is written, you will work for them.
I think what's really happened is the stuff that he says about like Disneyland, for example, is so you can do that yourself. That's what me and Jack are doing. The reason why you're here listening to us, and presumably further in the future, it is if we're successful at like, you know, getting our content out there, is like we're essentially creating a little pocket of our own little Disneyland pocket of the internet, where it's like Levi and Jack's world. Welcome to the Schizo Palace, which is the book club from hell and all the weird ideas that we've explored. you can almost, it's like a modern computational information technology has democratized what previously was only accessible to people like Walt Disney 100 years ago or whatever. Like it took a person to build a media empire, whereas like you can start your own media empire right now if you want from your laptop. Yeah, that's pretty amazing.
Further muddy the waters of the real. Contribute to the desert of the real.
Yeah. I'd recommend it.
Yep,
I'd recommend listening to Justin's explanation, which you would have just listened to anyways, but he's really cool. And also just listen to Justin's stuff and read his book.
Yeah. So shout out to the Other Life podcast. Shout out to the Other Life community, which is really, really cool. There's some really, really interesting people on there. I doubt his book is going to be out when we publish this episode, but pay attention to Murphy's upcoming book, The Independent Scholar. I'm pretty sure the draft version is still online, so I'd recommend that. If I can find it, I'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah, check out Justin's stuff. Justin Murphy on Twitter. And yeah, also like definitely let us know if there's other cool people that you want us to talk to. Like, I think what was really cool about this episode was we probably would have just come in like hot fire, like we normally do, just like start smack talking the French continental philosopher, and we had somebody who actually knew what they were talking about come in and like give us
it's very unusual for this show.
It's like okay, this makes a lot more sense if I can get somebody else to pass the book first.
Pre-digest it for us.
Yeah, no, it really helped a lot, and it made me appreciate a lot more like some of the more substantive insights from the book. So yeah, shout out to Justin for sure.
Yep. Thanks for listening.
See
See you next time.